Every morning for 20 years, Raymond Delgado set 2 coffee cups on the kitchen counter. One for himself, one he never filled. He would stand at the counter in the half-dark before sunrise and pour his own cup and then just leave the other one there, empty, waiting. He told himself it was habit. He told himself it was muscle memory from a different life, a life where 2 people shared a kitchen and mornings meant something ordinary and good. He told himself it didn't mean anything. But every morning, when the steam rose from the first cup and the second one sat cold and untouched beside it, he knew that wasn't true. The empty cup was not about the woman who left. It was about the daughter who stayed. Sofia Delgado was 23 years old, living in a studio apartment in Knoxville, Tennessee, 2.5 hours from the house where she had grown up. She was finishing her second year of graduate school. She called her father every Sunday. She never missed. And every Sunday morning, before the phone rang, Raymond set 2 cups on the counter. The second one was for the version of her that still lived in the house. The 7-year-old who had asked him the question he never fully answered. The 10-year-old who had cried into his shoulder on the night she decided she was too old to cry out loud. The 16-year-old who had stood in the kitchen doorway and said, "Dad, you don't have to stay home on my account," and meant it as a kindness. The second cup was for all of it, all the years of her. And 240 miles away in a studio apartment in Knoxville, Sofia Delgado had a habit of her own. She set her alarm 15 minutes early every Sunday so she could make coffee before she called her father. She always made 2 cups. She told herself it was in case she wanted a second one later. She never did. She never understood until a Wednesday afternoon in late April on the stage of a television studio why 2 cups had always felt like the right number. 2 people. 20 years of the same quiet ritual, 150 miles apart, neither of them knowing the other one was doing it. The answer to both of them had been waiting the whole time. It was just waiting on a stage. The Family Feud studio in Atlanta runs on a particular kind of controlled energy that is different from what it looks like on television. On television, everything is bright and fast and seamless. In person, it is bright and fast and managed by approximately 40 people in headsets who are very good at making managed things look effortless. The Delgado family arrived on a Wednesday in late April and went through the standard intake. Sign here, stand here, your microphone will be attached here, try not to touch your face. They were 5. Raymond and his sister Carmen, Carmen's husband Marco, and their 2 adult kids, Elena, 26, and her younger brother Danny, 22, who had been told 4 times that morning to tuck his shirt in, and had done it once and immediately untucked it again. The production assistant who walked them through warm-up was a young woman named Brianna who had done this approximately 400 times and still laughed at the right moments, which said something about her. She ran them through practice questions. Carmen buzzed in before the question was finished. Marco guessed confidently and wrongly. Elena was methodical. Danny was chaotic in a way that was going to be either terrible or excellent on camera, and Brianna had been doing this long enough to know which kind of chaotic he was within about 30 seconds. Raymond answered when it was his turn. He was correct each time. He did not buzz in early. He did not overperform. He listened to the full question, thought for a beat that was just slightly longer than the others, and answered. Brianna made a small note on her clipboard that was not about his answers. Raymond Delgado was 53 years old. He had thick gray at his temples, the kind that had come in his late 30s, and he had simply allowed rather than resisted. His hands were large and unhurried. He moved through the studio the way people move through spaces they know they are guests in attentively, without taking up more than his portion. He wore a gray blazer over a white shirt, dark slacks, and shoes that had been polished that morning. He had polished them the night before, decided they were fine, and polished them again before leaving the hotel because the morning had made him anxious in a way he couldn't name, and polishing shoes was something you could do about anxiety, even when anxiety had no specific cause. His family watched him the way families watch the member they are quietly concerned about. Not with alarm, with the particular attentiveness of people who know someone well enough to notice when they are carrying something and have learned not to name it out loud because naming it makes it heavier. Carmen had been watching Raymond in this way for approximately 20 years. She had a plan for today that Raymond did not know about. She had not told him. She had decided it was the kind of thing that was better to do than to explain. Raymond Delgado had been a single father since Sofia was 3 years old, which meant he had been a single father for 2/3 of her life and all of the parts she remembered. Her mother's name was Adriana. She had been 28 when she left. Raymond had been 33. He did not speak badly of her to Sofia, not once, not in 20 years. This was not because he had forgiven her. Forgiveness was a longer road than that, but because he understood something about children and the stories they carry. Sofia would one day form her own opinion of her mother, and he was not going to be the thing that shaped it. That was her work to do. His work was to make sure she had enough of herself intact to do it cleanly. He had never been more deliberate about anything in his life. The morning Adriana left was a Tuesday. Raymond had worked the early shift at the logistics company where he'd been a floor supervisor for 6 years, come home at 2 p.m. and found the apartment half empty in the specific way that tells you immediately, not gradually, not with confusion, what has happened. Half the closet, half the bathroom shelf, the coffee maker which had always been hers. Sofia was in the kitchen. She was 3 years old. She had gotten the cereal out of the cabinet herself, poured too much into the bowl, and was eating it methodically, one piece at a time, with the focused concentration of a child who has decided to be independent today and is fully committed to the project. Raymond had stood in the doorway for a long moment. He had looked at the half-empty apartment and the full concentration child, and he had made in that doorway a decision that was not dramatic and not spoken aloud and not the kind of decision that comes with certainty. He had just decided. He walked in. He sat on the kitchen floor beside her. He poured himself a bowl of cereal. "Good cereal," he said. "It's the round kind," she told him seriously. "The round kind's the best kind." "I know," she said. He had never moved from that spot, not metaphorically. From that Tuesday forward, wherever Sofia needed him to be, he was there. He turned down the regional manager promotion that would have required travel. He took the lateral move that kept him local and accepted the pay cut without calculation, because the calculation had already been done and the answer was obvious. He learned to braid hair from a YouTube tutorial at 11:30 at night when Sofia was 5 and announced that she wanted braids for her first day of kindergarten, and Raymond had said, of course, before he had any idea how to do it. He practiced on himself in the bathroom mirror for an hour. The first braids were structurally questionable. The second attempt was better. By morning they were acceptable. Sofia had worn them proudly. He had made her lunch every school day from kindergarten through 12th grade. He had never once sent her with a lunch that was not prepared the night before, labeled with her name, and included one thing she hadn't asked for but that he had noticed she liked: a clementine, a packet of crackers, a folded note with a drawing of whatever she was currently interested in. Dinosaurs for a while, then horses. Then a period in middle school when she was passionate about marine biology, and his notes featured increasingly ambitious attempts at squid. She had kept every note. He hadn't known that until she was 16 and showed him the shoebox. The thing about Raymond Delgado, the thing his sister Carmen understood, and his colleagues at work sensed, and the parents at Sofia's school observed from a distance, was that he was not performing fatherhood. He was not doing it for credit or for witnesses or even for Sofia's gratitude, which he had never expected and never calculated. He was doing it because she was his and he was hers, and that was the whole of it. When Sofia was 7, she asked him the question. She had asked it before in smaller ways for smaller versions of herself. But at 7, she had language for it, and she used it directly, the way 7-year-olds use language, without the social softening that comes later, without the protective layer of metaphor. "Daddy, why doesn't my mom live here?" Raymond had been washing dishes. He turned off the water. He dried his hands. He sat down at the kitchen table across from her, and he did not look away. "She needed to go somewhere else," he said. "That's not because of you." "That is entirely, completely, 100% not because of you." Sofia had looked at him for a long moment. "Does she miss us?" "I think she does in her own way." "Do you miss her?" "I miss some things, but I have you and you are the best thing I have ever had, and that is not a small thing, that is the whole thing." Sofia had thought about this. "Okay," she said. "Can I have some of your ice cream?" "Absolutely not." "Dad, fine, a little." He had written her a letter that night. After she was asleep, he had sat at the kitchen table and written everything he hadn't said, everything he wasn't sure how to say to a 7-year-old without either saying too much or saying too little, and he had put it in an envelope and sealed it and written on the outside, "For when you're ready, no rush. I mean every word." He had given it to her the next morning. She had looked at it carefully. She had put it in her shoebox. She had not opened it. He had written her one every year since. 20 envelopes, 20 years. The shoebox was at his house. He had never asked about it. He had never suggested she open any of them. The 21st envelope was in the breast pocket of his gray blazer on the stage of Family Feud, just in case. The game started at 2:17 p.m. The Delgado family was matched against the Beaumont family from Savannah. A loud, warm, confident group of 5 who had clearly practiced and who buzzed in with the enthusiasm of people who had been waiting for this moment for months. The first round went to the Beaumonts. Second went to the Delgados, largely on the strength of Carmen, who had been studying survey data with the kind of focused intensity that was, Raymond privately thought, a little alarming for a game show but completely consistent with who Carmen had always been. Steve Harvey had been watching the Delgados. This was something the audience didn't always notice and the contestants rarely understood until later Steve Harvey watched. Not just the moments the cameras needed, but the moments in between. The way a family stood when they weren't performing, the way they looked at each other, the weight a person carried in the set of their shoulders. He had been watching Raymond Delgado since the first round. There was something specific about Raymond that Steve Harvey had enough experience to recognize, the quality of someone who was doing this for a reason that had nothing to do with being on television. The Beaumonts were on television. The Delgados were playing a game. Raymond Delgado was trying to do something. Between rounds, while the production crew reset the board and the audience settled back into their seats, Steve walked to the Delgado side with his microphone and his unhurried pace. Raymond. Yes, sir. I've been watching you. I figured, Steve smiled. You figure a lot, don't you? You think before you talk, that's a thing. My daughter used to call it taking forever. The audience laughed. Raymond smiled, a real one, briefly. Steve let the laugh land and then, your daughter, where is she today? Raymond's smile didn't fall, but it changed temperature. Graduate school, Knoxville. She know you're here, a half-beat. No, sir. Why not? Raymond looked at Steve Harvey with the expression of a man choosing between two true answers and deciding to give the smaller one. Didn't want to make it into a thing if it didn't work out. Steve Harvey tilted his head once, just slightly. How long you been a single dad? The audience went quiet before Raymond answered, not dramatically, quietly. Kind of quiet a room produces when it collectively understands that the next answer is going to matter. 20 years, Raymond said. Since she was 3, she was 3. Steve Harvey was still for a beat. 20 years, he said, not to the audience, to Raymond. Yes, sir. Just you. Just me. Steve Harvey looked at him for a moment, the way a man looks at another man when language has reached the edge of what it's useful for. Then he said, all right, let's play some feud. He moved on. The crew reset. The game continued, but something in the room had shifted. Carmen, standing beside Raymond at the podium, had said nothing during the exchange. She had pulled out her phone for exactly 12 seconds, sent one text, and put her phone away. Raymond didn't notice. He was focused on the game. The third round was the closest. The Beaumonts came back hard, riding a run of good guesses from their youngest, a sharp 20-year-old named Marcus who had the kind of pattern recognition that made you wish game shows had a draft system. The Delgados held. Carmen was relentless. Danny, who had spent the first 2 rounds being chaotic in the expensive way, had settled into something better. He was watching the other team instead of the board, and it turned out he was very good at reading when someone was about to steal. Raymond answered 3 questions in round 3. He was correct on all 3. Each time he answered the same way, full stop, full breath, full answer. The Delgados won the round. They were going to fast money. Alina went first. She was methodical and good. She scored 141 points, which was a strong number, which meant the family needed 59 more points from Raymond to win the $25,000 top prize. 59 points. 5 questions. 20 seconds. Raymond stood at the fast money podium while Alina went to the isolation booth with Carmen and the others, the glass panel sliding across so she couldn't hear his answers. Steve Harvey walked to his position. He looked at Raymond. Raymond looked back. There was a moment between them that was not for television, brief, quiet, the kind of acknowledgement that moves between 2 people when one of them understands something about the other that can't be said in the format available. Steve Harvey had been thinking about what Raymond said. 20 years, just me. He had been doing this show long enough to know the difference between people who came on Family Feud wanting to win money and people who came on Family Feud needing something to work. Raymond Delgado needed this to work. 20 seconds, Steve said. You ready? Ready. Name something a single parent does every morning before their kids are awake. Raymond didn't hesitate. Makes coffee. Name something that gets harder the older you get. Letting go. A small sound moved through the audience. Steve Harvey heard it. Name a place where people cry without explaining why. In the car. Name something a father keeps that his kids don't know about. Raymond paused. 1 beat. Letters. Name something you'd do differently if you could go back 20 years. Say it out loud more. The buzzer. The audience was not applauding yet. They were completely still. Steve Harvey looked at the scoring cards. He looked at Raymond. He looked at the cards again. Makes coffee, survey said. The board turned 38 points. Letting go, survey said. The board 27 points, running total 65. In the car, survey said. The board 31 points, running total 96. The family needed 59. They already had it. The audience stirred. Steve held up a hand. Not yet. Letters, survey said. The board turned slowly 22 points. And say it out loud more, survey said. The board paused. The pause was 1 second, maybe less, but it was the kind of pause a room feels in its whole body. 44 points. Total 224 points combined with Alina's 141. The Delgado family had won. Carmen screamed. Danny grabbed Alina. Marco lifted both arms. The audience was on its feet. Raymond Delgado stood at the podium. He did not move for a moment. His eyes closed. Both hands flat on the surface, one long, slow breath. Then he opened his eyes and Steve Harvey was standing directly in front of him. "You all right?" Steve asked. "Yeah," Raymond said. "Yeah, I'm all right." Steve Harvey studied him for a second. "You said letters." Raymond looked at him. "On the question," Steve said, "something a father keeps that his kids don't know about. You said letters." "Yes, sir." That a real answer. The noise of the room was still happening around them. The celebration, the production team moving in, the Beaumont family being gracious in the way losing families sometimes are when the moment has been bigger than the competition. But in the small space between Steve Harvey and Raymond Delgado, it was quiet. "Yes, sir," Raymond said. "That's a real answer." Steve Harvey looked at him for a full 3 seconds. Then he reached into his jacket and produced a small card, which he handed to a production assistant with a look that the assistant clearly understood, because she nodded once and moved immediately toward the stage manager. "Give me 5 minutes," Steve said to Raymond. "Don't go anywhere." Raymond had no idea what was happening. He stood at the podium while his family celebrated around him and watched Steve Harvey walk off stage. What Raymond didn't know about was the text Carmen had sent 23 minutes earlier. What he didn't know was that Sofia Delgado had been awake since 4:45 that morning, sitting on the floor of her apartment in Knoxville with her laptop open and her coffee going cold, looking at a Google Maps route that was 2 hours and 41 minutes long. What he didn't know was that this was not the first time she had looked at that route. Sofia had known about the taping for 6 weeks. She had found out by accident. She had called her dad on a Sunday morning, earlier than usual, and Carmen had answered Raymond's phone because Raymond had left it on the counter when he went to check the mail. And Carmen, who was Carmen, had immediately told Sofia everything including the date, the studio address, and her own personal opinion that Sofia should absolutely be there. "He won't want you to come," Carmen had said. "That's exactly why you should." Sofia had thought about it for 6 weeks. She had thought about it the way you think about something when you already know what you're going to do, but you need the time to make peace with it. The thing Sofia Delgado had been making peace with was not just showing up for her father. It was the shoebox. She had carried that shoebox through 3 apartments, 2 cities, and 1 move where she had left behind a couch and a television and a set of dishes, and had carried the shoebox from the apartment to the moving van herself without putting it down. 20 envelopes, 20 years, unopened. She was not entirely sure why she had never opened them. She had tried to explain it to her roommate once, and what she'd said was, "I know they're good, that's the problem. If I read them, I have to know how good they are, and then I have to figure out what to do with that." Her roommate had suggested therapy warmly and seriously. Sofia had not disagreed. But she had also, the night before, the night she finally decided she was going to drive to Atlanta, taken the shoebox out from under her bed and sat with it for a long time. She had not opened the envelopes. She had done something else. She had opened her laptop and written her father a letter. Not long, not elaborate, 4 sentences. She had printed it, folded it, put it in an envelope, and written on the outside, "For when you're ready, no rush. I mean every word." She had mirrored his phrase without knowing she was mirroring it. She had never seen what he wrote on his envelopes. She had never opened them. Some things are written into people before anyone teaches them the words. She drove to Atlanta. She arrived at the studio at 1:15 p.m., was met by a production assistant who had been briefed by Carmen, and was seated in the audience in the 9th row left side, near the aisle. She had been there for the entire taping. She had watched her father answer every question. She had watched him win. She had watched Steve Harvey walk off stage. She was holding the envelope. And now her phone buzzed with a text from the production assistant, 2 minutes. "When Steve gives the signal, you stand." Sofia read the text. She looked at the stage where her father was standing at the podium, hands flat, looking out at nothing in particular with the expression she had known her whole life, the one that meant he was holding something and had decided not to put it down. She had spent 20 years watching him hold things. She thought, not today. Steve Harvey walked back onto the stage 2 minutes and 40 seconds later. He had his jacket off, not because it was warm, because he had decided somewhere in the 2 minutes and 40 seconds off stage that this was not a moment for performance. He handed the jacket to a stagehand without looking at it and walked to center stage. "Hold on," he said. The celebration noise stopped. The audience settled. Even the Delgado family, mid-hug, went still, Carmen and Raymond and all the rest of them turning towards Steve Harvey with the attention of people who have been told by everything in the room that something is about to happen. Steve Harvey stood in the center of the stage with no jacket and no cards and looked at Raymond. "I want to ask you something and I want you to answer me straight," he said. "All right. The letters, how many?" Raymond looked at him steadily. 20. A low sound from the audience. Applause, something more like recognition. 20 letters, Steve said. 1 a year. Yes. She ever read them? No, sir. Does she know about them? She has them. She knows they're there. But she's never opened one. No, sir. And you kept writing? Yes. Why? Raymond was quiet for a moment. Because they weren't about being read, he said. They were about being meant. I needed her to know that every year at least once I sat down and told her the truth about how I felt about her. Whether she was ready to hear it or not, the meaning was mine to carry, the reading was hers to choose. Steve Harvey said nothing for 3 seconds. 3 seconds on a live stage is a long time. He used all of it. Then he said, "Is that 21st letter in your pocket right now?" Raymond's hand moved to his breast pocket. "Yes. You carry it everywhere, every day, in case she's ever ready. In case the day comes." Steve Harvey turned slowly and faced the audience. "There is someone in this building today," he said, "who has been carrying something too." Raymond went very still. "There is someone who drove 2 hours and 41 minutes this morning because she decided that today was the day." Raymond's head came up. "There is a young woman in the 9th row," Steve Harvey said very quietly so the microphone barely carried it, "who would like her father to know that she read every letter on the drive here, all 20, in the car, and she has something to give him." Raymond turned. He turned the way you turn when you already know, when your body has understood before your mind caught up, when 20 years of a person's presence has calibrated you to find them in any room without looking. Sofia was standing, row 9, left side. She was 23 years old and she was standing up in a television studio audience and she was not performing anything. She had her father's jaw and a posture that said she had been sitting in this seat for 2 hours trying not to fall apart and had more or less succeeded and was now done trying. "Dad," she said, one word. The room, the cameras, the crew, the Beaumont family, the 40 people in headsets, the whole managed, bright, carefully orchestrated room held its breath. Raymond Delgado walked off the stage, down the steps, up the aisle. He walked with the pace of a man who has been going somewhere his whole life and has finally arrived. He reached his daughter and she stepped out of the row and they stood in the aisle of the Family Feud studio and held on. Not the performative embrace of people on television. The other kind. The kind that has weight and history and 20 years of early mornings and empty coffee cups and braided hair and lunch notes and letters that were meant before they were read. Sofia said something into his shoulder. Too quiet for any microphone, Raymond nodded. His eyes were closed. Then Sofia pulled back. She held up the envelope, white, small, slightly creased from where she'd held it for 2 hours, and she looked at her father. "I read them all," she said. "In the car, all 20. Raymond looked at her. "I wrote you one too." She held out the envelope. He took it with both hands. He looked at the outside, his own words in her handwriting. "For when you're ready, no rush. I mean every word." Raymond Delgado stood in an aisle in Atlanta and looked at his daughter's handwriting and did not try to hold his face together. He was done holding things. What happened next took 12 minutes of real time and will take less to tell. The production team, operating on some professional instinct that supersedes the format, simply let the cameras run. Nobody called cut. Nobody redirected. Steve Harvey stood at the edge of the stage and watched, and when someone from the crew came to ask him what he wanted to do, he held up one hand, palm out, which in the language of people who work with Steve Harvey means, "Not yet." Sofia walked up to the stage with her father. Carmen met them at the bottom of the steps and wrapped both of them in a hug that required her to be on her toes, which she managed without difficulty, because Carmen was the kind of person who achieved what she needed to achieve regardless of the structural challenges. Danny was crying and not trying to hide it. Alina had one hand on Raymond's arm and was nodding slowly, the way people nod when a thing they hoped would happen has happened, and they are grateful in a way that doesn't need words. Marco, who had been on the periphery of the Delgado family story for 15 years of marriage to Carmen, stood with his hands in his pockets and his chin down and looked like a man who has witnessed something that has made him want to call his own children. When the family had been given the time they needed, Steve Harvey walked back to center stage. He took the microphone. He was quiet for a moment. "I want to say something," he said. No performance in it, just a man saying something. "I've been doing this for a long time. You all know that. A long, long time." A small laugh from the audience. "And I will tell you, you can write that down and take it with you. The best moments on this stage have never been about the game." He paused. "They've been about this, about a person showing up, about somebody deciding that the thing they have to say is worth saying even when they don't know if anyone's ready to hear it, about love that doesn't need a witness, about," he stopped, looked at Raymond. "About a man who wrote 20 letters and carried a 21st one in his pocket every day just in case. That is not a small thing. That is a man who decided every single year that his daughter was worth the words, whether she was ready or not." The audience was entirely still. "And a young woman," Steve said, turning to Sofia, "who drove almost 3 hours this morning and sat in row 9 for 2 hours and read 20 years of her father's heart in a moving car and then walked into a room and said 'Dad' and meant it the way it's supposed to be meant." He looked out at all of them. "That word," he said quietly. "Dad, you heard it, you felt it. That word said like that by someone who means it like that, that is the whole thing, that is everything." Paused one final time. "Some of us have been waiting to hear it. Some of us have been waiting to say it. If you are in either one of those groups, don't wait as long as these two did." The audience applauded, not the reflexive applause of a game show, the sustained, real kind. Raymond Delgado looked at Steve Harvey. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," Steve said. "She drove." Sofia laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes out of people at the end of something they've been holding for too long. Raymond laughed too. Carmen was already telling Danny to stop crying, which had no effect whatsoever. They drove back to Chattanooga that evening, Raymond following Sofia's car in his own, both of them taking the same highway, their headlights in the same dark. Sofia had insisted. "You're not driving back to Macon tonight," she said. "Come home, we have the cereal you like. The round kind, the round kind." "I'll stay one night," Raymond said. He stayed 4. The first night, Sofia made coffee, 2 cups, and set them on the counter of her studio apartment and then looked at them for a moment before she understood why that had always been the right number. She told her father. Raymond stood in her kitchen doorway and listened and then laughed quietly to himself, the particular laugh of a person discovering that something they thought was their own private language has been spoken by someone else the whole time. "Me too," he said. "Every morning." "Every morning," she said. They drank the coffee, both cups. Over the 4 days, they went through the letters together, not all at once, not in order, just the ones Sofia wanted to ask about. She would pick one, read it again, and ask him what was happening that year. He would tell her. Sometimes it was a small thing, a moment at her school, a conversation he'd overheard, something she did that he'd been watching and hadn't found the words for until he sat down to write. Sometimes it was bigger than that. The letter from the year she turned 12. The one where he wrote about what it felt like to be both the person she needed and the person who didn't always know how to be that person. The letter from the year she turned 17. The one where he wrote about the version of himself he had wanted to be before life became what it was, and how she had made him more of that person than he had managed to become on his own. The letter from the year she left for college, the one he had started 4 times and finished in 45 minutes at 2 in the morning on a Saturday, the week before she moved, and had cried while writing in a way he hadn't since the Tuesday of the cereal. Sofia read that one twice. "You cried. I cried. You never cry. That is incorrect. I cry in the car." She looked at him. "In the car," he confirmed. "It's private." She laughed. He did too. On the last night before he drove back to Macon, Raymond stood in the kitchen of his daughter's apartment while she was in the other room, and he set 2 cups on the counter, and this time he filled both of them. She came in and saw them. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. There are rituals we build without knowing we're building them, small, repeated acts that are really just the shape of love made daily. 2 cups on a counter, a letter on a birthday. Driving the same highway in the dark, headlights ahead and behind, not arriving at the same time but arriving together. Raymond Delgado spent 20 years raising a daughter alone and telling her once a year, in an envelope she wasn't ready to open, that she was the whole thing. Sofia Delgado spent 20 years keeping letters she couldn't read and making 2 cups of coffee every Sunday morning and calling her father without ever missing a week. They were saying the same thing the entire time. It just took a stage and a camera and a man in a suit who knew when to stop the show. If this story found something in you, share it with someone who needs it today. A father, a daughter, someone who's been carrying words they haven't said yet. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. We find these stories because they're worth finding, and we tell them because they're worth telling.